Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the May 10th policy meeting of the Lower Merion School District. This meeting is being recorded and is on Zoom. And for any community members who are joining, thank you for coming this morning. And with that, I will pass that over to Megan.
Good morning, everyone, and happy policy meeting day. We are going to jump in to many policies that we've already taken a look at and are up for adoption. I'll also note that this is scheduled to be our last policy of the meeting of the year, which is typical for us. Sometimes we add a June meeting if we think we need to advance a policy to adoption, but at this point, all of the policies that we need to move forward are ready for adoption, at least as far as the administration is concerned, and would be then hopefully adopted on during the next regular business board meeting. So again, taking it from the top, we have a number of policies that are proposed for adoption that we have looked at several times at the committee level. And I'll just start at the top, which was, policy 133, academic class rank. We had looked at this previously and updated some of the language because, as you can see, it was last reviewed in 1989, which seems like a long time ago at this point, but we wanted to make sure that it was consistent with the updates that we had done to policy and administrative regulation 213, grading student progress. And at the last meeting, the one addition that was recommended is to paragraph D, which it says beginning with the incoming 9th grade students. So we clarified the applicability of that particular provision. So that was the change that we talked about and is incorporated here. So that's on page 1 of your packet.
Can I ask a question about that? I just want to clarify. So on an E, they discuss the Saturday academic program. What is happening going forward? Are we getting rid of Saturday academic program?
So for school year 25-26, we'll look at, like we talked specifically about organic chemistry,
right,
and how that can look if it is put in the regular schedule rather than doing it on a Saturday.
Okay, so we'll leave it as is now, and then, because there will be Saturday classes next year, essentially. Okay, so we'll revisit it next year. Thank you.
So is there any question from off of Zoom? No.
Yeah.
No, okay.
I just want to know.
So are we, are you okay with moving this forward?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And what we'll do to address that is to move 133 to future discussions so that we, on the agenda, so we remember that next year that we'll bring it back to policy to make sure we're addressing that Saturday.
So we're approving it today,
Yeah,
and then readdressing it.
Exactly.
Cool. I
so
just
we don't lose sight of it. That's,
great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Right. Any other questions about that one?
I think we're good moving it forward,
Okay.
with the addition or the caveat for
Great.
Saturday classes.
All right. The next two policies, policy 151, we've again talked about how we've been talking about the restructuring of 151, which used to be titled Student Athletics. So the idea was to, capture all that we do sort of beyond the academic programs offered during the school day so that we have more of a comprehensive perspective on what we're offering, how we make decisions about offering, what we offer, and budget impact related to those offerings, among other things. So this was the sort of the first move to put everything together. There's still some refinement that we need to do. I think the policy is reflects everything like the basics that we need it to, and does track language that existed in the prior policies. So for example, policy 124, co-curricular opportunities, is being recommended for repeal, but that's been incorporated now into 151. Just to drop down to the administrative regulations, you see 151-1, that's in 3B of the agenda. Eligibility, so we've identified eligibility criteria and maintained those standards into this new, it's not a new way, it's a new number for the AR, but a new structure, but the content remains largely the same. And then what we haven't, wasn't ready for prime time yet because it never existed before, which is 151-2A, which will be an AR related to student activities, but 151-2B, just so we could maintain the information that we need to maintain for student athletics, that's now in that particular AR. So I'm sorry to have jumped all over the place, and probably we'll look through them one at a time, but I just wanted to give, again, to those that may be joining us for the first time, the intent was to sort of restructure this in a way that made more sense, even though maybe my explanation was a little bit all over the place, but I'm very comfortable recommending this format that we'll continue to build on. And then, I'm sorry, I should say, on the 151, you'll see based on the discussion we had last month, page 2 highlights some language that we added, selectively fund. Page 3 adds language to clarify the intent to provide these opportunities kindergarten through 12th grade. And then on page 4, again, a reference to the funding and added a few cross-references. So those were based on the discussions we had, the adjustments that we made to 151 last time.
I have questions. Can you point to or direct me to where if it's in the AR or the policy, where it's kind of explained or guided how people what the eligibility is for students in terms of academic, like is there like a,
yeah, that's in the administrative regulation, so that's on page 57.
Okay, so that's 2A.
Of the packet.
151A,
Yeah, so. The academic eligibility right now is listed under, sorry, I should say, for athletics, it's in 151-2B. So it begins on page 75 if you're talking about the academic eligibility. And that's sort of why there's been this disconnect related to activities from a policy perspective.
Yeah.
Though we, try to maintain those expectations in practice for activities, it hasn't been as formally explicit in policy that those standards apply, not just to athletics, but to activities. But because PIAA holds standards, that's why it's always been with athletics. And so, I think as an administrative team, we're looking to make recommendations so that there's some consistency. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So are you, okay, just wanted to double check. I actually, when kind of cold reading this again last night, I was wondering, the use of the term selectively fund, I was like, my mind went to, okay, what is the criteria? What are the guidelines? How is it being selected? And I'm wondering is there somewhere else that it does, I didn't see anything that really spoke to it except for section 3. But I feel like there needs to be a reference of what are the guidelines or what are the guardrails for when because it just sounds a little nefarious, like I'm going to selectively fund this. So
Yes, it is a little bit of a, I wouldn't call it a term of art necessarily, but I think that's what we're trying to move towards, some framework for determining like how we recommend these opportunities get funded, so that because we hear a lot about, well, sports gets this and TSA gets this and what's left for others, and I think being intentional about how we do that through a framework, I think that's what selectively is intended to refer to, is to make sure that we are not favoring one type of activity over the other, so maybe there's a better word, but I think that's
I'd like
what
to-
the,
if we
and
can get-
that was my understanding of the intent of the language. But
Yeah, and I'm not really sure what that better word would be, but selectively just seems a little too arbitrary to me.
but it's also related to like the constraints of funding too, right?
Yeah.
Because we can't necessarily fully fund everything because we,
Well,
there are
could we
limits.
select within frameworks and funding availability or something to just further clarify? Just so it just sounds a little bit like it's not just, yeah, selective, yeah. Yeah,
appropriately.
yeah.
Also, maybe including the idea of like an ongoing sort of reassessment of where things, like utilization and a budget, obviously. So that there's,
There's also the section 3, which does go into a little bit of the Roman numeral 3, delegation of responsibility, and then if you go in, it does, such regulations shall include, and a system of valuation and to extent appropriate funding, so it could be in accordance with that section 3.
yeah.
And that's what's not really been
Yeah.
built out yet, so it's comprehensive in terms
Yeah.
of athletics and activities, so it is something we would look to, did we use, and to the extent appropriate.
Yeah.
I mean.
We
that
could just
was-
say, we could just reference section 3 or something like that, if that makes it easier.
And fund in accordance with section 3, in
Yeah.
accordance with the framework
Yeah.
established in
Section 3, yeah.
accordance with.
That would make me feel happy.
Okay. And fund in accordance
nothing
with
like
section
policy,
3,
something to
something
refer
like
back
that, and
to.
take out selectively, or selectively fund in accordance with
Yeah,
section.
yeah.
Keep that
in
all
accordance
together.
with.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, all right.
Because it
I
also
like it.
helps to level set that not everything will be funded. Like,
Yeah,
we just have to be
exactly,
clear. Yeah.
Exactly. Okay, so we'll change that to and selectively fund in accordance with section
Yeah.
3.
And that doesn't, to me, that's just a minor change, so.
Yeah, I don't think we need- yeah, I agree.
I'd be okay to move it forward with that. Okay, that's all I have for this. Otherwise, I'm okay with moving it forward with
Okay,
that.
great. Anything else?
Okay.
All right, and as I said, 124 will be repealed because that has been incorporated. The next policy, or set of policies, begin with policy in AR 108, which is on page 8 of your packet. Again, the changes here, inclusive of 109, 105, which are both for repeal, and 119, the intent was to make this more user-friendly, put things together that make sense to be together, and so it's more of a one-stop shop for folks who want to know more about selection, adoption, review, and objections to curriculum and resource materials. So again, that was the framework for taking a look at these policies. The most recent conversation resulted in a change on page 11, which was to add the section related to access to technological resources, and also some cross-references. So that's based on our last conversation here at the Policy Committee, we made those changes. And again, 109 and 105 are both slated for repeal as they've been incorporated, as has one other thing, just to reference the administrative regulation, the AR to 119, which largely reflected the objection procedure, has been incorporated into AR 108, and as has the form that's referenced, which is an attachment A. And that form is now on page 20. And again, that was a move over, and so I think all of the items that are slated for repeal have been incorporated and updated.
Avi, do you have any questions?
No, not right now, I don't.
I do have one thing I just noticed when I was reading it, and this might be something that's been in there for a while, but I was just looking at section 8, page 13, section A, and the fourth paragraph, like right at the bottom. And it says, both principals and department chairs shall be responsible for informing all staff members of the policy on coverage of controversial issues in the curriculum. What is the scope of staff members? Because it seems to me building and department chairs is building level, but it seems to refer, that could be interpreted of either district-wide or building-wide. And I wondered if it's building-wide, I was thinking we should clarify that this is within their, I don't know, their building or whatever the terminology we use to limit it to the school.
Shouldn't it be district-wide, though?
But principals and department chairs are at a district level. I'm not sorry, at a
building level.
Building level, and I don't think that it should be personally, I don't think it's the principal's purview to inform the entire district-wide staff. It's the staff within their building
I see.
that is
Right.
under their purview. Yeah.
So I would recommend, because what we normally write is something like the superintendent or designee, and then the designee would be responsible for like pushing, and it could be the principals then
Yeah.
are directed to their staff members. So we could use language like that, so it's not as granular as what's referenced here.
Yeah, that would work.
Does that work? Does that
Yeah.
work for everyone? And sometimes I see where there's specific titles that may have changed. I see, like assistant superintendent, we may tweak that to just say superintendent or designee throughout, and then we can just make sure it's covered.
Yeah. That would work for me. Are you, and Evan, do you have any questions? No?
The only question I have, and this kind of is attached to this section, but, so if there is an issue that staff doesn't feel comfortable addressing based on the controversial nature, at what point, so from reading this and from it looks like there's sort of a hierarchy of if staff is uncomfortable, they can raise it with their principal, who can raise it with the superintendent. At what point, how does it work where if there's a controversial issue and it's sort of no one's touching it, it's a hot potato, how does it get addressed?
Well, I think we start with what's in the curriculum and what are we required to address, and in terms of, and I don't know if I got the look. Do you want to jump in? Yeah. But I think depending on what the nature of the topic is what you want to ultimately do is have staff members are comfortable delivering the content that the district is asking or requiring to be delivered. So, if it's so controversial that we have many staff members that are uncomfortable doing it, I think that's a pause point to say, like, what's happening? Is it because the nature of what we're asking to be delivered, the type of the content, what's at the root of that? Because it's never going to work effectively if we have too many staff members that are feeling a lot of discomfort with it. And so I think it's always about searching to understand why that's happening and working through that with staff, because I think one of the worst case scenarios is that you have staff doing it ineffectively or inappropriately, and that creates other problems that we then have to address on the other end. So I think if the district and the board and the superintendent and the administration is aligned with saying this is critical, curricular, a topic that we need to cover, then we have to make sure it happens, aligned with how do we work with staff to feel comfortable delivering it.
At what point does professional development become a discussion? I know that professional development is not necessarily curriculum, but at the same time, how does that get brought in? Because if there's a discomfort or some kind of resistance to discussing something, and it's because people don't have the vocabulary for it, at what point does that happen? that we bring in someone.
So our high school staff, specifically our English and social studies staff, have been working with Dr. Lucky from Villanova on how to approach issues, a wide variety of issues that are controversial in nature, to build their capacity. That work is going to continue. We're also engaging with a group, a gentleman, Boaz DeVere from Penn State for next year, where he's going to be working with a group of our teachers, most likely from both high schools, maybe some of the middle schools as well, to build capacity to build instruction around some topics that either have been historically difficult for people to teach, or that are not being covered well, to sort of build that capacity. In his work, he's worked with school districts across the country with really good results. So, my hope is that initial cohort will just be the start of the work with him, and that the district will continue that moving forward, because I think his work and the benefits that districts across the country have seen over especially the last couple of years will move us forward. And I think sometimes there are teachers and administrators, there are issues that we don't want to touch, or we're afraid to touch for a couple of reasons. Either we don't feel like we have enough information or the right information, or we're worried that we're going to intentionally or unintentionally disenfranchise a group of people. There's, some community concern. So I think wrapping that all in with the work of Dr. Lucky and then Boaz next year is going to move us forward.
Okay, that's good to hear. I want to make sure that every controversy can get, can kind of reinvigorate itself if given a chance. So everything can become off limits if we let it. So I think what's really important, especially just in our district especially, is we want to make sure that there's a process to if something is incorrect and needs to be kind of challenged, we should absolutely have that process. And if information or controversial topics are not being discussed, we should have a way of getting that in as well. So it's sort of like the opposite of a book ban, like bring controversy, within appropriate bounds and within legal, bounds as well. But I think it's really important that we learn how to disagree, and especially through this kind of discussion. And I want to kind of touch on how that happens. So if the staff is unfamiliar with a certain area, or how do we make it so that it's not a personal thing? We have to be able to deliver certain information.
Right, and that's why I think, we had some discussion about policy 119, like keeping that explicitly a standalone as something that staff are aware of, that feel like, not necessarily, I don't want to use the word, I was going to say empowered, that's not the right word, but feel like there's board support for what you just talked about, so that, navigating these situations, because even the term controversial is like,
100%.
what is controversial to one person may not be to another person. And I use the example of like our transgender and gender diverse policy here in the district. Like somewhere else that becomes controversial, but because we have policy around it in Lower Merion, it's not really a controversy anymore. We've settled that. We've decided this is the policy we're going to follow. So, I think it takes, the effort and the training and making sure that also we're keeping the eye on the curriculum, that the state standards that we have to cover as well. So it's a balance of all of that.
Yeah, and I don't in any way mean that we should start wearing foil hats, like totally not where I'm going with this, but I think, it really, and especially looking at the way that today's world is right now, not being able to discuss or disagree is truly akin to societal suicide. So I want to make sure we keep that in the
I
forefront.
kind of think it's on us to teach the kids how to have civil discourse.
Right, right.
Yeah.
I also think, we have a pathways for communication when folks, parents, guardians, community members. One of the things that I've had some conversations with the curriculum team about is creating that internal pathways of communication, so that if someone is uncomfortable with the topic or needs some support of the topic, they know exactly who to go to. So they don't sort of just stay in that spot where they're like where they're uncomfortable. So, is it talk to their curriculum supervisor, to make sure that we're responsive with professional development, because it may be that we have people that are uncomfortable teaching X, whatever X is. We don't have to wait until a professional development day to bring someone in. We can do it during a PLC time. We can do it during a planning period. We can do bite-sized PD and fundamentally change how that person is feeling, which will then just, create better conditions in classrooms.
Thanks for bringing that up. Okay, thanks. So, I've lost track of where we are at.
And any questions you have about 108?
Yeah, no way.
AR, policy or AR?
No, I have no, and, no, so just, is there anything online or anything? I'm assuming you'll speak, yep.
So there is a hand up. Ms. Altschuler, if you can put your question in the chat directed to me, I can then read it.
And just to mention, if anybody is online, there are no persons in person from the community.
Okay, perhaps, okay, all right, so there's two questions. One, these are both from Ms. Altschuler. One, I think, goes back to the previous conversation. Can you give some examples of co-curricular activities? Does this include clubs? And then about controversial topics and professional development for how to have controversial discussions, including teaching students how to have these discussions. Any consideration for using organizations focused exclusively on this work, such as with Braver Angels or Bridge USA?
In addition to the work that we're doing with Dr. Lucky and Boaz from PSU, our leadership team will also review a number of those other organizations, for sure. Because there are some organizations that specifically operate in the place, that work with, where that could help students be able to have these conversations as well. And I think co-curricular,
An example of a co-curricular would be a activity that has a classroom component. So like you can think of usually a music, like a instrumental music, a band, orchestra that also has a performance and a co-curricular aspect to it because there are expectations outside of the classroom.
I think also like global citizenship, where they do community service projects.
Okay, thank you for that question. And so we'll be okay to move this along with the superintendent or designee addition, and I guess next.
I'm sorry, there's one more question.
Oh, one more question,
Ms.
okay.
Altschuler, is there a policy regarding clubs?
So this is intended to address clubs, which I've been calling activities. So activities and clubs were intended to be synonymous, but that would be the AR that we're looking to develop because we haven't had that kind of little more formal structure around clubs through a policy lens. So that's what we're working to build. Right now, they operate sort of based on handbook language and other practices and rules at the building level.
Thanks. Yeah, so that will be tuned in for next school year when we bring that. Yeah, we go. Something to look forward to. Okay, so then that includes the repealing of 109 and 105, so in this, moving it forward.
Correct, and also the AR to 119.
Oh, 119,
Which
yes,
again
sorry.
was the objection piece that
Okay,
has
so-
moved forward. So
Yeah.
what remains for 119 is the policy statement.
Okay. Okay, so then we're on to AR16 next.
Policy AR 816, web content development and hosting. Mr. Frazier is a celebrity guest today, policy. Also, last time, we made a few other additional changes. Do you want to highlight those?
The substantive change to the policy was to remove more of a procedural step that really was dated and really not in alignment with what we're trying to teach users and employees about cybersecurity. It was regarding them registering websites, and part of that was giving us their credentials for that, which is completely 180 from what we're saying to people now, which is please never give your password to anyone. So it was dated and time to be cleaned up. That was really the substantive change of the policy, and it appeared in both the policy and the administrative regulation.
Yeah, the changes were minor. On page 41, I think we made a change to the titling, adding Director of School and Community Relations instead of Webmaster. On page 42, paragraph A2, I think was added or changed. That was the original, those were the original changes, and then we deleted some language that was previously on page 46. So what you're seeing is the clean version.
Right.
Yeah.
Reading through it, nothing stood out to me with.
No, I remember the conversation from last month, so
Yeah.
I think this looks good to me. Thank
Yeah,
you.
I'm fine with it too.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I will say, I think this is probably something we should continue to look at, though. Like,
Yeah.
keep it fresh with AI and everything else coming up. Like, we probably
I
don't want to put
agree
it.
with you on that part.
So, I mean, I feel like we do annually have some edit to some technology policy. I think they are certainly living documents.
Yeah.
So-
Yeah, and we do have that general placeholder policy implications relating to use of artificial intelligence. That's sort of our reminder that, like, we know that that's where we're headed at some point, and whichever policies we would need to sort of pull forward for review, we'll be ready to do that.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Okay, well, thank you for joining.
Okay, so the next, moving on to administrative regulations, if we're ready
Yeah.
for that, one of our favorites, I would say, top 10 for this year. Board Procedure 007, board meetings. We talked about a change, which is page 55, relating to the length of time that we maintain unedited video. And we, based on discussions and at the table and subsequent, the revised proposal is to maintain for 2 years.
I have questions about how much the cost differential is. I'm just curious, because 10 years was prohibitively expensive. How much does 2 years cost? Do we know?
So, you're talking about I think you're referring to the actual storage, like the physical storage.
That was what was explained, that was the kind of the hurdle that,
Correct. I'll have to double check, but it was about $2,700. Do you?
I pulled the numbers up last time, but basically what this enables us to do is reuse discs.
Right.
So we're not spending, another, whatever it is, $2,700 a year for discs that are then just sitting for 10 years before. So there will be a cost savings. It's also, like there's space, there's time.
Right.
So,
Right. But it's-
and looking at the amount of views that the older meetings get, they don't, basically.
So, but just a little bit of context here. We are still going to have them in multiple places, so it'll still be available online. It'll still be kept in an unedited storage, like a disk, if you will. So we will continue to have multiple areas or multiple copies.
And we're not going to be using YouTube or any other, we're still going to kind of keep it as we have been, just,
That's
Got it.
correct.
Okay.
That's correct.
thank you.
Just for awareness, one of the concerns with YouTube is advertising can go on those pages. We have no idea or control over what is being advertised, and there could be things that are not necessarily aligned to our district.
And in full transparency, I was sort of pushing Mr. Frazier to look at YouTube, but one of the things that he brought up and was also discussed, not at our superintendent's meeting, this last one, but the one before, was the inaccurate captioning that happens. And so if we're to make things truly accessible for people, and I went on and I looked at a board meeting from my last district, one that I was at, and I know what was said, and the captions actually pull something that, in a couple cases, actually changed the meaning of what was said, and so that's another concern, you know, because everything has to be ADA accessible.
Certainly.
I think the 2 years, and as far as the legal hold, anything that arises should arise before 2 years, that we would require to hold it for a legal purpose. Yeah.
And, I mean, it should, it doesn't mean that it always will, but the only official record, I mean, or I should say, the official record of a meeting is the minutes. So everything else is just unofficial.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay, so I'm good with the 2 years and we'll bring this to the board, and if it might be something that if they have any just questions about, might point it out to them, yeah. Okay, thanks.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, moving along, we touched on these, the next two earlier, which is the 151 administrative regulations related to eligibility, which begins on page 57, and then student athletics, which largely tracks the original policy, student athletics. And one of the discussions that started us looking down that path was the name, image, and likeness, which is incorporated here. So if you're looking for that now, it's now in the AR. So those, we didn't, I don't think there were any, I know there weren't any substantive updates to either one of these since our last discussion. And again, we'll continue to refine these as we move forward. Because they're ARs, we have a little more flexibility. So if we do what our intent is over the summer is to build out that student activities, come back to this, make sure everything's aligned. So, you know, ideally at the beginning of the year, you'll see a full packet of those updates and revisions that, you know, are consistent for both activities and athletics, or inconsistent where appropriate.
Why are the C attachment A, is that going to be hyperlinked? I was just wondering why it's underlined, the C in multiple places. Like it's under section 9, page 66, section 9, student credit eligibilities, and then section 12, C attachment B, recognition of new interscholastic teams. And I was just wondering why the C was underlined. Which I know it's in the trees question, but it just wasn't.
Well, as I'm looking at just the references to attachments, so like when formatting always catches my eye, so we'll go back and make sure that's consistent. It's probably not a hyperlink, but we'll make sure whether it's, you know, pick a font. Italics, bold, caps.
You're speaking my language.
Yeah, no, well, when I see it, it drives, I'm like, oh, we gotta go back and do that. So those are things that we'll
Okay.
clean up as well. So again, it's probably not hyperlinked, but we can double check that.
Okay. I mean, I have to say, nothing popped up last night when I was reading this, so, so these are all, we're going to second reading for these, right?
Well, the ARs technically
Yeah,
don't need to be,
Yeah, they don't
but
need to
they're
be,
associated
yeah.
with the 151,
Yeah.
so that you will be moving forward to, for adoption.
Okay. Is there anything online for questions? Okay, well, I'm okay with this if it's,
Okay. Great.
are we looking at both 15, or are we going to look at 152B separately? Or, I don't have questions on either, but.
Okay. I was taking them together, but we can
Okay.
do them, whatever questions you have.
No. I'm fine with, I'm up to 207 already. I'm looking through the packet, so. Abby, are you okay with us moving to 207, or are you still looking at one?
Yeah, no, I'm looking with that.
Yeah, okay, we're good to move to 207.
Okay. And 207 is our student attendance policy, and it's largely a compliance document. There are state laws about compulsory student attendance that the last time we looked at it, there had been some updates that we incorporated in terms of what we are required to do, for example, when students are not in attendance, when they're absent, and how many days they can be absent with, no excuse before they're considered to be truant, and the procedures that we have to follow, which are, again, dictated by state law and regulation, and are incorporated here. One of the, and this is the revision that's being proposed to the regulation on page 91. The intent behind this is to give to not be note chasers. Like, a note has to be provided, but not a note, I should say, like, for a period of time, the note that's provided on its face should be deemed acceptable up to 10 days. So even if it's not clear what the reasoning is, even though what is excused absence is illness, family, like those are, stated in in this regulation and are consistent with state law. Sometimes, families, depending on the circumstances, depending on what their ability is to get online and write, exactly what's going on in accordance with what's considered excused. We feel like sometimes we end up using resources to chase a note for no purpose. And this just streamlines that a little bit so that we can focus on situations where it's clear that after 10 times of no note or 10 times of like questionable notes, that we are really going to focus in and use resources in those cases, as opposed to like, 1 or 2 times where the note may not be as clear as we want it to be. We just accept it on its face and keep moving, because it's not creating an attendance issue that rises to a level of truancy, et cetera. So this is intended to be both parent and administration friendly, so that we can just, again, point resources in places where there really are critical, like, attendance issues, as opposed to just it being a question of, like, was the note written in the way that we wanted it to be written? Does that make sense? Okay.
I just have some, just so I understand, that makes sense. At the same time, so when I look at like the definitions of truant, it says 3 or more school days and 10 notes. So these are saying that these are notes for excused absences, am I correct? Okay. And then including educational trips. So just so I understand like the process, so if a student is on a trip, are they marked absent first? Like,
If they're on, not a school trip.
you're saying like a
Like
family or
yeah, like there's
oh,
a term of like an educational travel.
I see.
I've had to submit those.
I was
Yeah.
confused
Or
with,
question
because I was
get-
thinking like they're on a field
That's
trip,
it.
why are they absent? Okay.
Yeah, yeah, that's,
Okay,
that's
so-
a great question, because I can understand, yes. that's a
Yeah,
good
okay,
question,
so
but-
educational, not necessarily academic educational.
Right, so if a family's, during the school year, we like for families to plan around the school year,
Sure.
because there's so many limited days in a school year, but sometimes that doesn't happen, so an excused absence can be for educational travel, and then families share with us what that educational purpose is.
Sure.
So we can excuse it.
Okay, so then I have a couple of more questions. So this says 3 days is, 3 unexcused days is truancy. So 10 absences, even if excused, that seems like a lot of absences unless I'm being like unfair. It seems like a lot, no? It's not a lot, you're saying?
Oh, no, it is.
Is it?
It
Oh,
is.
It is a lot. So I'm just curious how that number. Okay.
But
How
those,
did that number
the difference between unexcused and excused. So an excused, the unexcused absences are what we have to follow
Account
up
for.
on, yeah, and account for. If it's excused, they do have up to 10 days. I mean, students can be out, with COVID for a few days. So like, that's the type of excused absence that we're not coming after a family and saying, your child's truant. They're clearly not, because they're sick and they're, making up work at home and doing what they can, so.
Is that
that's
10
the-
day, or that 10 absence number, is that legally, or where did that come from? I'm just curious where the 10 days, like,
That's school code, isn't it?
school code,
Yeah, there's,
10 days.
and there's like,
meaning state
And
school
a-
code? Okay.
yeah, there's also an accounting about chronic absenteeism, which is like 10% of the total number of school days, which that's like a federal law thing. So now, with the change in hours and days,
Right.
like that's gonna, that may throw that into, another discussion item down the road. But really, we look at like, 18 days is when a child would be identified as chronically absent, even if those absences are excused.
Thank you.
I mean, it can be, I appreciate this because having the burden of, like, your child just needs to get sick once in that 5 days. And then if they have, it's really easy to have another couple of days here and all of a sudden you're at 10 days and you didn't even realize it. And I appreciate less of a burden on the families, and also having to go to the healthcare system too with getting notes all the time. Unless, it's not automatic, it's just if needed. Because there may be something else that needs to.
Yeah, so 10 excuses marks the standard. So if these are, I'm getting a little weedy here, but if the absences, those 10 absences are just parent written, they are considered cumulative, which means after 10, you get 10 cumulative absences, you are required to provide a doctor's note to excuse absences after that. Now, if you provide a doctor's note early on, that's considered non-cumulative, so those are always excused. So doctor notes always excuse an absence in a way that doesn't add to the 10-day requirement, or the 10 absence requirement.
Sorry, were you going to say?
No,
Okay,
no, no,
I have
no.
one more question about this, because I'll be completely transparent that we went to a bar mitzvah and the teacher told us to tell you that it was educational. So we went to Miami for a bar mitzvah. But so I want to understand, it was educational.
I was going to say,
But just like not for us. So I'm curious, so what's the time frame that someone has to submit the because I'll be really transparent, we totally did it like while my husband was in the air with my daughter, I didn't end up going, but I'm just curious how that works, just because my concern is, and I totally agree that we should take the burden, I do not want to add any burdens, but I want to make sure that people know what's expected so that we know what's actually happening.
So for educational trips, because it's supposed to be pre-approved, it's
Right.
a 2-week. I mean, we recommend longer if you can make it, do that in advance, but it's a 2-week notice period for those types of approvals.
Okay, thank you. Maybe that could be.
But that's, yeah, we
Worth
can,
being
it's,
put in there?
we don't, yes, we don't like to advertise, like.
Sure.
But we also know that what you just described is also
Gonna happen.
like a reality.
Right.
Right, but we also know that, like, if we've, that, you know, where we are right now, and I think as an outcome of COVID, we're seeing higher rates of absenteeism and a less of a, like, you know, I think even like sort of culturally, we're not sending kids to school as like, this is an expectation every day you're at school. And so I think we are still trying to like write that a little bit, because until we, you know, create a new system of going to school, like, we're still bound by the law that we're required to follow up when kids aren't at school. And and that's a huge undertaking for, you know, staff that also have the needs of everyone that's in school to be addressed.
Absolutely.
So, I'm sorry, no, did you have something? I'm sorry.
I have another question. Sorry. So just because this is not something that I've heard about happening here, but it's something that I've heard about happening, you know, local areas. How does a walkout happen? So how is that considered like an absence? What if that were to happen? How does that get, I don't know what the word is, but like categorized?
Like in the middle of the school day, well, if they miss class, then they are, you know, students would be penalized in accordance with what the, you know, consequence is for missing class.
So, but they aren't marked absent that day? Like, it's like
No.
they get the.
No, that wouldn't be,
time.
like, if you miss a class, you're marked absent from that class, but you're not marked absent for the day, assuming that you haven't missed the whole day. Like, if the walkout started at the beginning of the day, then that would be different.
And what, is there a policy? Because to me, it would be an attendance thing, but maybe it isn't. Like, what is our policy on, what happens if if a student decides to walk out?
That would be handled under Policy 235, which is our student rights and responsibilities, which is
Okay.
essentially our discipline code.
Right, okay.
Aren't there two different types of walkouts? There's ones that are sanctioned, like, see, they've submitted for approval or something, or am I mistaken with that?
Sometimes if kids are going to engage in like a walkout or a protest, they'll opt to do it at a time that they know that consequences won't be given.
Yeah.
Lunch, as an example, I think after my years as superintendent, there have been a couple, and they've largely been at times that kids knew they weren't going to be missing class. If they happen during class time, it's considered like a class cut, and then the discipline is for not being in class.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, okay.
That's all my
I just was wondering, I had a question on the attachments with the language. Is that language that we've created? And I have no problems with it, but I just wondered if that's flowing down to us from truancy thing.
If you go on the state website, this is the recommended language now.
Okay.
I will also say that this is something we've been in process to, and some of our letters are a little bit more, what's that, nice?
It's pretty harsh.
Yeah, so
This language is pretty harsh, and we know it. But this
Yeah, I mean, there's a balance, like, you want to make it clear, like, these are the expectations. This is largely language from the state, and we have been working through trying to update this with a more Lower Merion feel, which is, some people might say, a little softer language, but I also thought it was important when we first pulled this together was to say, like, this is what this is the recommended language. We're not like, it's harsh, but it's also not, it's the law, so.
kind of was guessing that, so appreciate the confirmation. Thank you. Okay, so is there we don't seem to have any changes, just questions, I guess. Is it with the,
The only, I guess, I don't know if this would be a change, but I'm sorry. For the 10-day, when to submit a note by, like, I don't know if that's something we should, I understand not wanting to advertise it. I completely
Isn't
get
that in the
but-
handbooks?
Maybe having a cross, I don't know, just because whenever I see that, it made me think.
We can add 14 days in here for educational trips. I don't think that's a problem.
Yeah.
It's on the form.
It's on the form, right?
And just also for general public, like there is a quick link on the website called attendance.
Yeah.
And all that information is on that page. It's under the parents and under quick links, so it's pretty easy to find.
Okay.
And it has links to the LMSD Safe Arrival system, which is how parents can call in or email in.
I've done that, and it continues, even though I've submitted, I continue to get the calls, too.
Yeah.
So it's a timing issue of when roll is called and when those auto robocalls are generated. The idea being, if your kid didn't make it to school and they should have, we want to let you know ASAP. And so we'd rather place the call and you're like, well, I know, because they're sitting in bed, as opposed to your kid has now wandered for another half hour from where they should be.
Is there any online comments at all for this? So, that attendance we're okay with, so did we decide, so we're okay with it because it's pretty standard where it is, it's under the parent section of the website and the attendance, yeah.
Right.
Okay.
I don't know that this is largely, the intent isn't to push this out and change practices of parents, but it's allowing, administratively us to, just manage the volume and the letters, I think, that come in, or the notes that come in a little bit, with a little more efficiency. So there wouldn't be a big push to change, because it's technically not a change, because the law is a law and we have to comply with that. It's just how we kind of process at the other end of it.
I have to admit that phone call kind of prompted me, oh, I got to put the absent thing in. Where's that?
Yeah.
Go to the parents.
And we
find the
appreciate
section.
that, because then we can say excused. It works, everyone's happy.
Yeah. Okay, so are we moving on to discussions then? The section? Yeah.
I think so. So just to sort of clear out one of them, we already talked about 151-2A, which is one that we'll bring back as an AR to consider. Policy 101, equity, which is on page 104, we've talked about, the revisions. We've also talked internally just about, in terms of the process that this equity policy evolved and making changes to it. Do we need to sort of go back and do a little more, checking in or review with other stakeholder groups, because there was a lot of involvement in the original policy development, just to clarify, before it gets back, so if the board wants to make these changes, just to have had the input and buy-in of groups that had had a chance to look at this previously, is just a sort of a question for the committee, because I think I guess, what degree do you think there's urgency to move this right now with the changes you're proposing, or do we have time to do a little bit of a check-in and bring this back in the fall?
Is that typical when there is a policy made how does that usually work?
It depends on the policy. This one and some others that were just more community generative than others, I think there may be some benefit to bringing it back, to having some additional voice in the revision of it. Just because I lived through it, wanted to share that back because there were a lot of input and work that went through this, both at the Achievement Imperative Task Force had a subcommittee that worked through this, and then we brought it to CARE and to the Equity Committee of the board multiple times for a review and input. So to me, that made this a little bit of a different journey for this particular policy than others, and that's why I don't know that I would say every policy I would take the same position with, but I don't have, concerns that people will say this is drastically different than our intent. Otherwise I would have shared that. I just, in terms of honoring or acknowledging the work that had been involved in developing it, and because it wasn't that long ago, that was my thought. But again, we can certainly move forward with it as well if you think the urgency to make these revisions is now. So.
Well, I would push the questions back to both like Shawana and you to say, is the current policy as written making any hindrances on being able to some certain aspect in supporting the students and the faculty and staff, and because I would like to, I think going through the two committees, the CARE group and the Equity Committee, I would appreciate them having another look at it before we move it forward. But I don't know if you feel the same way, and
I don't feel strongly. I find it's a little bit. It just seems like out of the ordinary to do. So I just sort of feel like if it's not typical, I'm not sure why it would.
And maybe what we could move it to a first reading and then make sure that there's like awareness that it is moving forward with some revision. I mean, I liked the conversation around like the language turning from to a more of an invitational. So I think that's a positive, adjustment. So
yeah,
I think people will be receptive to it. And again, we could do kind of the first read this month, have some time to get some input, and then in the fall, come back for the adoption.
I mean, we've had already two prior meetings where we've had a lot of discussion, and I feel like reading through that it kind of, from what I remembered from prior discussions, it seems to fit where we were going. And so if I'd be okay to bring it to first reading, but then bring in the other groups to, just as the stakeholders who were involved the first time, having the purview just to have a say in it too.
So I wasn't, I wasn't in the district when we went through the process, but I've heard, as many have heard about the process. One of the things that we could do is in upcoming meetings is just to inform some of the people who are part of the process that the policy is going to be up for first reading, or and in that way, if they wanted to come and lend their voices, that may be a way to get input from some of those other groups who may not really know. I'm sorry, Megan, they may not be following policy,
You mean they're not like live?
Right, every Friday, Friday.
I am totally deflated
Friday.
right now.
I know, they may not. So I think that honoring voice is important for such a policy like this, because it does touch on every student's life, their lived experiences here in the Lower Merion School District as families and communities. And so I think letting them at least know that this is up, and then if they want to come to a meeting, I do because I've heard this, and I'll just say this from coming from another district and being on the state level with districts that's working on policies and have worked on policy. This is a model for a lot of districts, and you hear about it. So when I came here, it was like, wow, they have a policy where other places did not, or were struggling. And so this is out, not just here in Lower Merion. So it will be, I think, just having people know that we're taking a fresh look at it, and at the advisement of the board. I know that we opened it, we were starting to look at it for one reason, and now it's evolved into a more comprehensive look. but just letting those stakeholders know, I think it just will bring more harmony and make people not feel like this was something that's done to them, and I'm not saying any group, I'm just saying in general, because I know that it was shopped around. I've heard multiple places and had multiple conversations.
That actually sounds like a good plan, but I mean, is there a way to get the message out to the students too? Because I mean, it feels like their
I think you
voice should
did
be
have
there.
student voice too.
Yep, we certainly can do, I like that, and I think that aligns more with the concern that you expressed, which is like, that seems like outside of the policy, and so or outside of our process, so moving it forward to a first reading, getting people, the awareness, and then between now and September, so
Yeah, that's great. It's a way of civic engagement too, or community engagement, I should say.
yeah.
Before the school year is over, we could share it with some of those student groups and their leaders so that we can have student voice and at least have some kind of a document of student voice before our seniors leave and try to get some for the next year
Sure.
for that first read. Thank you.
I wholeheartedly support that.
I have a question, a language question. So I'm curious why we didn't use socioeconomic status and we did go with economic disadvantage, because disadvantage is this is the only, like, negative, yeah, I was gonna say modifier, but negative is the right word. So everything else is just sort of a factual, national origin, not disadvantaged origin. So this is the only one that has a negative.
I
So
think
I
we
would
should change
say-
it, yeah, I don't.
Yeah, thank you.
Just one quick question. Is this how it's classified though with PDE? That's my only question.
The historically.
Historically, yeah. I just want to make sure. Is that the definition that they use?
I think it is, but I still think that we can change it so it's not the only, yeah.
I'm just stating why it may have been written that way.
Yeah, I think it's pulled right from something PDE has on their site.
I think socioeconomic status is just a much better term. Much more inclusive. We have a public comment?
We have questions from Ms. Altschuler. Has the policy been brought to those meetings, CARE, AITF, Equity and Anti-Racism, this year or only last year? How has it been brought to students for their voice, and which student groups have had input? So I think, Ms. Shaver, you're talking about when this was originally, when Policy 101 was
It was like the
originally passed.
2021.
Yeah.
Time period.
And we've answered that question already, of like how we're going to bring it out to the larger community. Yeah.
Yeah, had it been brought this year or only last year? And I think the answer to that is it was brought when it was originally being worked on in 2021. How was it brought to students for their voice? And then which student groups have had input? So again, I think it's all relating back to the initial.
Yeah, as far as the connection to students, I'd have to go back and recall in this particular case, but I do believe that student voice was solicited during that time period, and I think it was done at the building level. That said, this was not, the policy was developed in 2021. The administrative regulation followed that, which also tracked a similar path, which was done, within the committee and then shared out in various places over the course of the following year, which was probably the 21-22 school year.
And I believe also the sort of genesis of a lot of this was the student protests that happened in 2020 that really brought a lot of this to the forefront. So there were a lot of students that were involved in that process and speaking to the board.
Thank you for support. Okay, so, and is there another
There's
question?
one more comment from Ms. Altschuler. Seems a little problematic to only bring in certain student groups, as Shawana mentioned. Sure.
I'm saying that we should involve all student groups. I didn't specify any student group, and I was not here when the policy was enacted. I'm talking about future tense of getting multiple stakeholders involved in the conversation, letting everyone know when we are going to look at the policy at the direction of the school board so that there is an opportunity for community voice.
I have one more question. the glossary of terms, are those, so some of this, I know from just looking at the PDE website, come from PDE, but are all of these terms PDE, like, you know, did we just kind of pull it from there or not?
No, the sources for all of these terms should be are identified.
I guess maybe my better question is, does PDE endorse the sources? Like,
I can't, well, do you want,
So PDE's portal, as with a lot of other things, are pulled from other states. So I think what we have to do is look at the definitions they have there, look at the source for those, and I think we talked about perhaps developing our own glossary.
yeah,
right?
so, yes, and I think like the moves we've made with other, and this is another reason why remains in a discussion format for me, is that the terms could move to administrative regulation or live somewhere else. So it's not just a glossary of terms that are like bound to equity. I think there's a glossary that we could have that's more like broadly applicable for our community to access, because not everyone goes to policy and looks for defined terms. I get that. So if we had another place where we housed these terms and others, and again, when we developed this in 2021, there weren't a lot of examples of what this should look like. So when you ask about what does they didn't have any model for us to work from when we were developing it at that time, or at least one that was as comprehensive as I think what we ultimately came up with. So I think there are some moves that make sense in this moment beyond just these edits. And again, between a first read and a second read, there are some things that we can do and bring back for further consideration, and including the glossary.
yeah,
I'm sorry.
no, please go ahead.
So I know that just being a part of it from PDE, that there was, and then just the policy framework, so there was the framework, and they did have some definitions. I will say that Lower Merion took it a extra step with at least citing the sources from where some of these things, so you'll see like the PSBA equity toolkit, so you'll see some of those things. So I think adding the source and even looking to see if those sources have extended or expounded upon their definitions of these terms will also be good.
Yeah, which is actually why I think pulling it out of a policy and putting it somewhere a little more nimble, a place that we can make those adjustments as terms evolve, that we don't have to bring every changed term back to the committee every time. But
Well, are you talking about doing like a umbrella glossary for all that would encompass for all policies and ARs, so that there would be a standard terminology? I mean, that sounds like a hard lift, but
you took it to a whole new level.
Well, but-
I wasn't quite there, but I like how you're thinking.
But I would help.
A dictionary.
But, I mean, I think that's a cool idea as far as for when you're talking in meetings and stuff, and we're using language that not everybody, they'd have a quick glossary lookup for what's this acronym mean, what does this, and I just think for transparency, it would be pretty cool. I don't know that might take a long lift, but.
But Megan,
It's going to be my new side business.
Could it live in two places? So if it's here, right, or I'm just going to use, because we're talking about this policy, because someone may be flipping through and need the term, but also in that large glossary as well, so that they'll know here and as well as in our other place, and if we make changes, we could change it.
Right.
And those.
Yeah, or you cross-reference a
Yes,
glossary,
right.
because you don't want to have to keep changing it in two
Exactly.
different places. So, yeah, I think we have another summer project.
Since we're in the weeds about it, I'm going to add a suggestion if it's okay. So one other term that I would love to see is ethno-religion, which is what Jews are, and it's not listed. So Jews are an ethno-religion, which means we're not just one thing, or just, it's not just the color, not just the nation of origin. So that would be a great addition as well. And if it's not PDE approved, then maybe we should consider what else isn't, or, you know what I mean? If there's sort of any question about any of these, we should probably check all sources. But that one,
Well, we have the term creed in there. Would that,
nope, not the same thing.
Not the same thing?
No, creed is more about your belief.
Your belief,
It's
okay.
different than your religion. It's more about your belief and your kind of your moral, you know, your.
Okay.
But ethno-religion implies so we can get into this a different time, but, you know, Jews all came from Israel, from Judea, and as we were expelled and you know, people settled other places, but we've always had the same religious and like ethnic origins, even though we come from different places and look different. You know, there are Ethiopian Jews, there are Chinese Jews, but we're all Jews, and it's one of those characterizations that's not included that I think would be more inclusive when we're talking about being equitable and being really, you know, nimble. That's a term that for sure could be put to use. Thank you.
All right, so it sounds like see, there's a little more conditions on it, like we can move this to a first read now with the changes, but it sounds like we're moving towards even more substantial, you know, changes, which is fine. So that's up to you to decide. I think, you know, whether you want to move forward now or pause and bring it all back together with a little bit of a different look.
So the two changes, let's see, ethno-religion.
Yeah.
That.
And the socioeconomic status.
I mean, to me, those are definitions that the first level discussion would allow us to vet these changes. I mean,
Sure.
The only other thing, though, is I just want to be respectful of Anna's contributions as well. Do we think that she would want to have an opportunity to review this before we moved it forward either? I'm just curious because she's not here presently.
I mean,
I agree that I don't think that any of this should be super involved, but
I mean, it does include the.
I know that she was involved in the.
It includes the changes that she suggested which were mainly in this first opening section, so,
Okay.
I can't say how she would feel about that per se, but I feel like it incorporates what she asked for in the past, that moving it to I would be comfortable moving this to first reading, but I don't know how, but we need to be in agreement.
Yeah, no, I am as well. I was just wanted to be, because I know this is something that Anna has also worked on and had been involved in the generation of, I think, as well. So, I have no concerns about it. And I also just curious, what's currently on the website? Like, which version is equity? The original is on the website.
The original, yeah.
Got it.
So none of these changes.
Until it's approved.
Until it's.
Or adopted, I mean to say.
Exactly.
Got it, okay. Well, then I will say
I mean, it's
that-
on the website through board docs, but not, like this version. People could see, but not what's live and considered to be policy is the
original from 21.
original, correct.
Okay, so then in light of that, I would say that there is a little bit of, in my opinion, some timely urgency to get the changes made, because I think that, again, not to rehash so many things, but I think the original language might not have been what, you know, is a bit more kind of exclusionary than it was intended to be. I think the intent was very clear that it was not meant to be that way, but in reading it now, it didn't come across that way when I read it. So I would say that for sure, moving it to first read is a good idea.
Yeah, I agree with you, just to have it more encompassing for, and also, we're going to be having summer, we've got June. I'm thinking that in a sense of timing, it would be nicer to bring it to first reading, to elevate it to a level that people should be, that says, we need to start looking at this because we're moving it along. And hopefully everybody will be reading it over the summer and coming up with their ideas and come back to us in September with, ready to go.
Perfect by the pool. Yeah.
Put on your $10.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I agree. So I have no concerns moving it forward, yeah.
Okay, so we're in agreement. Okay. And
And then we
there's
can
still
communicate
one, is there anything else? Did we hit 212?
212 was, I don't think we got to this the last time, but this is something I think we, when we revised the policy 212, we noted that an administrative regulation hadn't been developed, and there were questions around just some of the touch points where, you know, parents receive the information. And so this was a starting point to reflect sort of our practices, and something we'll continue to work on. Because it's an AR, it's something we, in practice already do, and we can continue to refine this. So because we haven't had one, I don't know that there's like great urgency to this. It's more of I think more of like a notification thing. This is what we do and what happens, and so forth. So I am neutral on where this goes from today, yeah, but it was again that's why it's for discussion.
So just so I'm clear, for discussion means it's not in the, it's not like public. It's not something that's on the website?
Not yet, no.
Got
no,
it, okay.
No, and because it's an administrative regulation, we
wouldn't-
could make
right.
it, this is just like a notice to you, and if there's any questions or comments that you have that.
To me, it looks fine.
If I remember correctly, the prior discussion went on checkpoints and proper notification to parents. Is that,
That's in the back page.
which, I mean, I'm not seeing anything that catches my, what about you?
The only thing is the parent-guardian conferences. My only question is, do we want to clarify that they're in person that they have to be in person, that they can be virtual? It doesn't matter, because it's not stated, and I don't know if that is something we need to make explicit.
I think my recommendation is to not make it explicit, just because there are times, we seem to have lots of conversations, but, at the end of the day, we always, I think, try to accommodate whatever works best for the parent or guardian, but
And this is.
sometimes the staff has to, depending on those factors too.
Right, and when you have a student that has an IEP or 504, you may be having conferences a lot more, and most of them are online just for convenience too.
I just wasn't sure if there was like a minimum, if there was sort of like one will be in person, or if I didn't know what just discussion.
I think we can leave it open.
Okay. Then I don't have any other questions.
There's no questions for me.
And that concludes the agenda for today. We do already have some exciting topics to talk about next year that are related to some changes in the law that we're going to have to look at and update our policies that are reflected for future discussion. Anyone here or in the virtual audience that would like to reach out to me and talk about policy, feel free. While we adjourn for the summer.
Yeah, and if I could ask too, that there's been a lot of call for looking at the special ed, so it would be nice if we could add that into our agenda for next year.
Yes.
There's one more public comment from Ms. Altschuler. She says, "Thank you, Dr. Yanni, for making these meetings accessible by Zoom after only one request."
You're welcome.
Sorry, I didn't know, I thought from your motion you were going to answer. Okay, well, thank you. With that, this brings the end, last policy meeting for the school year. Boo-hoo. And Well, the next meeting will be in September, and to be determined, so watch the calendar. And we'll see you, and thank you for, okay.
I'm sorry, can I mention one other thing? I apologize.
Oh, okay.
But the changes to the walk zone will be changed back in that administrative regulation, the 1.5 to 1.
Okay.
Because it's already been settled, we're just going to make that adjustment, and I wanted to make sure I mentioned it before.
Okay, that makes sense.
In
Okay.
the committee.
Okay, thanks. No. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
for all of
And
your
thank
work
you-
on this.
And thank you
Thank
for
you.
whoever, who joined us online as well. Thanks.